I think one of the things I'm really curious about is how you make so much music. And I was wondering if what is your creative process when it comes to starting songs? We talked about finishing tracks, but what about starting songs? Do you have just like a time you start? Do you just work when you feel like it? How does the process work for starting the 100 tracks to wheedle down to a 14 track album?
Yeah, it's always changing. I mean, there was definitely a time where had heard Jerry Seinfeld talking about how he kind of like works 9 to 5 like a normal person. And I was like, I'm going to try that for a little bit. And that was good. Honestly, that was like an interesting that you realize how much you can get done if you actually work 8 hours on something. Um, it sucked, but at that time I didn't have a job and I had committed to production again. So I felt like it was the least I could do. And, I encourage people to try that, even if it's just for a week, to understand like what your output could be. Because yeah, I've worked 9 to 5 jobs and actually had to work quite a bit. So it was nice to be able to apply that work ethic to music and understand that very few people are actually doing that. And just trying to open up the computer and just make something is the hardest part. You know, um, for me, it takes me a couple times to, sometimes I mute a lot of stuff and I'm like, ah, this sucks, whatever. But I try not to make a new session. I try to like keep that session open and like, save a new version or something. And then, try some new chords over the drums that I'm doing or whatever. And just try to keep it moving forward because I find that like closing the session thing can be a little negative. So, um, and I start with drums a lot too. I should say that. That helps me as like a reference point, and I find that I get a lot further with demos when I write drums first, and I'm not doing drums afterwards. Which there's a time and place for everything, obviously, but yeah, for me, drums as a starting off point was always a cool place because then if I play guitar and bass, I was like pretty close to a song already, and I've been pushing myself to program a lot more drums that sound real, as opposed to using friend stuff or whatever, just cause. And I found myself just making a lot of drum loops just for practice over a pandemic, especially with addictive drums too. And a lot of those have just led to songs, And I've made the drums just for practice, really. And then, you find yourself to listening to one of them, you're like, this is kind of good. So, that ends up being a lot of it. Um, you know, Trying to make something out of those drum loops that I'm making kind of as practice. And I find the drum thing I can do early in the day. That's something I can like, at 11 a.m. I could be like, all right, I could whip something up real quick. Where sometimes melodic stuff, if I'm not hearing it, I'm just not hearing it. I don't know. So, but then, stuff starts to open up a lot of the time for me as I'm starting to mess around and hear some kick patterns. I'm like, ooh, I'm starts to feel like a song for me. And then, I've also taken the opposite approach and a lot of things on Homegrown, I made a melodic sample first, like a lot of folks are doing for sample packs or whatever, and really just remixed my own samples and put them to my drums that I was making. So a few of those tracks are actually only, I think we mixed them as 2 tracks, whereas like a melodic sample and a drum sample. And that was kind of my vision for a few of those, was like a very minimalistic hip hop approach to that. But yeah, there's a time and place for every process, I think.